The iconic Japanese film studio Toho's giant lumbering nuclear lizard is close to celebrating 70 years of major property damage, landmark destruction and multiple counts of affray since its titular screen debut in Ishiro Honda's masterfully shot original black and white kaiju monster movie classic from 1954, Godzilla. 7 decades isn't enough to show any signs of an early retirement yet though, with the release of its 33rd Japanese film appearance in Godzilla Minus One, and a forthcoming 5th American appearance soon via Legendary Pictures in their Monsterverse series. Before I review Minus One though, a quick history lesson. Since the 1954 original, we have seen a lot of flavours of the Big G. After its first sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, tried to keep the same tone, the series quickly embraced goofiness just as quickly as it embraced colour from King Kong vs Godzilla onwards in the Showa era's original 15-film run. Rather than using carefully controlled shutter speeds and slow movements to disguise and work with the fact that Godzilla was a man in a suit destroying cardboard miniatures, the series just embraced that it was just a man in a suit in order to deliver some entertaining brawls with an increasingly bizarre roster of suitably suited up foes, including fan favourites like Rodan, King Ghidorah, Gigan and Mechagodzilla, sometimes with backup from allies. As the Showa era series continued, the fights got sillier, the films got weirder, and Godzilla gradually embodied more humanistic mannerisms as he constantly wavered between a dominant threat to humanity to more of a saviour figure against the far worse baddies. Don't get me wrong though, these films are super entertaining and a blast to watch, but the style had certainly run its course by the end of the 70s. Enter the first reboot of sorts in 1984's The Return of Godzilla, a less goofy back-to-basics affair that sees Godzilla as the main threat once again, returning after 30 years to wreak more havoc on Tokyo. It's a little slow-going, but certainly one of the more satisfying reboots that helped re-energise the series, spawning its own cycle of films that brought famous monsters back into the fold, in a more comparatively serious and consistent manner. This was dubbed the Heisei era. While I say comparatively serious, the films still featured their fair share of alien invasions, cyborgs and time travel. It certainly ended on a high note though, with 1995's Godzilla vs Destroyer, easily one of the best looking films in the series, featuring the most impressively integrated blending of suitmation, live action footage and miniatures, and a pretty damn engaging narrative with high stakes. As America took its controversial first stab at a Hollywood iteration of Godzilla in 1998, Toho ushered in a third series of Godzilla films dubbed the Millennium era, starting with Godzilla 2000 in 1999. Much like The Return of Godzilla, 2000 stripped the formula back with another soft reboot. Well, until the introduction of a strange UFO around the half-hour mark. Still using the tried and tested suitmation for the most part, it was another decent entry, even if it didn't entirely stomp much new ground. The Millennium era steadily got wackier until it ended with a spectacular Godzilla vs every monster ever romp titled Godzilla Final Wars in 2004, celebrating the behemoth's 50th anniversary and giving the series a long overdue rest afterwards.
I knew that tuna head wasn't up to much.
It would take American reboot number 2, with Gareth Edwards' visually stunning 2014 Godzilla film featuring Bryan Cranston, to spark Toho to break the series out of its longest period of dormancy in the best way yet. Unlike the previous Japanese soft reboots that generally acknowledge the 1954 original, Shin Godzilla is a completely modern reimagining. It's simultaneously the most stripped-back Godzilla film as well as the most subtly experimental one. It also marks the first time that a Japanese Godzilla is not portrayed by a man in a suit, instead mostly using CGI. Right off the bat, it's easy to get into the flow of the film's initial breakneck pace due to its quick and sharp bombardment of information via the slick editing of television and internet reportage, phone camera snippets and boardroom meetings. It really isn't long at all before a not quite fully evolved, googly-eyed, salamander-like creature drags himself up from the sea, pulsing blood and seawater through his gills and rocking a cold, non-blinking, open-mouthed stare as it slowly starts rampaging through Japanese harbour towns on all fours in a manner that looks humorous and utterly terrifying at the same time. This cancerous-looking mutated beast begins slowly evolving as it continues to ooze blood everywhere, gasping for breath and learning to stand on its 2 legs. The final bipedal look of Godzilla in this film is truly menacing, and the hinted at idea that every chunk of its body that's blown off by missiles and bombs has the ability to potentially redivide its cellular structure and grow into a new beast is pure horror movie stuff. The CGI in this is blended well with some miniature work here and there to create a much more palpable sense of destruction. Just as the original 1954 Godzilla used its destruction imagery to echo the nuclear aftermath of World War II, Shin Godzilla clearly intends to invoke images of the fresher scars of the 2011 earthquake and ensuing tsunami. All of this, of course, is balanced with the human element of bureaucratic satire, which follows politicians fumbling around deciding on how to reassure the public that the situation is completely under control, despite the clear evidence of chaos outside. Some of the film's best moments are the juxtaposition of politicians deciding on the proper room to have their meeting in, the preparation of their correct uniforms, and the loss of their professional credibility for doing or saying the wrong thing, whilst a 200-foot nuclear demon crushes everything in its path. The humans do have an arc, though, and the rise of a team of younger scientific underdog minds cutting through the red tape to figure out a left-field solution before the USA has to nuke Japan again is a rather satisfying act. As the first live-action Godzilla film in 7 years, Godzilla Minus One manages to craft a cinematic experience that narratively and visually takes the strongest elements from the best Godzilla films, refines and masters those elements, and weaves them brilliantly into something that the films have rarely successfully delivered, a fully engaging, humanistic, character-driven story. To the best of my knowledge in the long history of these films, this is the first time that a Godzilla film has used the post-war setting of the original to tell its story, and I'm not sure why it hasn't been done until now, as it just seems such an appropriate setting. Kicking off in the last days of the Second World War, Minus One introduces our main protagonist Koichi, a kamikaze pilot who stops off on an island used for the refueling and maintenance of aircraft. The mechanics quickly realise that there is no fault to his plane, suspecting that he's trying to subvert his duties as a suicide air bomber. The lead mechanic is sympathetic to this though, as he correctly suspects that Japan is on the verge of surrendering, and sees little reason for one to throw their life away for nothing. This thought process, however, is very atypical of traditional Japanese nationalistic values at the time, which were rarely individualist, and the film clearly uses these troubling views as a critique of pre-war Japanese values that installed the notion that living with shame is somehow worse than dying for a lost cause. There is another scene early on where Koichi returns home to a bombed-out neighbourhood and is confronted by his neighbour. She is very briefly happy to see him until she very quickly becomes distraught by the notion of him being alive and well, as it becomes a realisation of the fact that he didn't fulfil his duty to die for his country. She immediately blames his failure to do this as a direct result of their destroyed homes and the previously unthinkable notion of Japan's surrender. I won't talk about the plot too much more, but suffice to say that each successive story element brings in new and interesting characters into the mix, who are well written and genuinely add to capturing your investment into the human drama, which really is more than can be said for any other Godzilla film, to be honest. As well as examining the values of wartime Japan, the subject of PTSD is explored quite well too. Enough about the humans though, what about Godzilla? The Godzilla in this film is easily the best he's ever looked in my opinion. Gareth Edwards' portrayal of the Titan in the American 2014 film was an exceptional CGI rendition that was not only far more in keeping with the general idea of the creature's look than say America's first lizard-like attempt in 1998, but generally one of the very few really impressive instances of a film of its type where you actually felt the weight and gravitas of a huge beast from a human perspective. Godzilla Minus One takes the ethos of that human perspective and human-driven story and applies that framing very well here. As such, Godzilla's post-nuclear presence is gargantuan in spectacle, and you care a lot more for the human characters caught in its tracks. This works exceedingly well, particularly when Godzilla first emerges from the sea in a manner that reminded me of the same awe that I felt when first seeing Ray Harryhausen's rendition of the Kraken at the end of Clash of the Titans as a kid.
Godzilla.
The CGI in this is done exceptionally well, because the film knows where it wants to draw the most focus. Scenes aren't busier than they need to be. The action and destruction are choreographed and realised beautifully, and so that you never lose geographical sense at any given scene. All these elements are at their strongest when Godzilla inevitably reaches the Ginza district in Tokyo for the film's awe-inspiring centrepiece. In all the depictions of Godzilla doing major property destruction, not once can I really think of a time where a human character that you have investment for is in the thrall of one of its destructive set pieces, not even in the original. Usually you're just left there smiling whilst he does his Tokyo destroying thing. This time you're conflicted by enjoying the frankly masterfully crafted scenes of havoc and annihilation, whilst also on the edge of your seat hoping that certain characters will make it out of the perilous situations they found themselves in. It made me realise that Godzilla films have bizarrely really lacked elements of true human peril in them. Usually after such an arresting centrepiece, a film like this would usually lose its momentum and start to limp along for a bit until a decent but not quite as satisfying final act. I won't say any more of the plot still, but I can say that the film absolutely does not drop off. The latter acts build upon all that has come before it to deliver an extremely satisfying reactionary act that follows the excellent formula of Shin Godzilla's second half, but to even better effect. Much like Shin Godzilla as well, this manages to make excellent use of the original film's fantastic musical cues, using them at the right moments to heighten the spectacle and not over-egging it for cheap nostalgia bait. As soon as those credits rolled, I felt satisfied to call this the definitive Godzilla experience. The original is beloved for its time, and it's a film that I highly respect, but this just simply takes the tools of 70 years worth of filmmaking wisdom to craft the best kind of Godzilla film one could hope for, and as such, the best kind of giant monster movie you can hope for. This is a thought-provoking, brilliantly paced, visually magnificent work that weaves spectacle, drama, action, humour, excitement, horror and intelligently woven subtext into its 2-hour runtime. You can't ask for more, really.
Godzilla Minus One